Hello YouTube and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Today I'm continuing my quest. I recently decided, having read the third novel by Anthony Burgess that I've encountered, that I want to read everything by Anthony Burgess because I think he's one of the 20th century's finest writers and he's written something like 30 novels. There's a lot of meat there for me to dig my teeth into. So I have started going to used bookstores, and whenever I happen to be in a used bookstore, I look for novels by Anthony Burgess. And if I see any, I buy them. And the one I recently bought is called Byrne. It is a novel in verse. It's the last novel that he published. In fact, it was published posthumously shortly after his death. It was found among his papers, and it was published. And it's a poetic, it's weird because it's a poem. It's like an epic poem, but it's really a novel of this rather unimpressive man called Michael Byrne, who was like a composer, a minor artist, a minor composer who wrote for films. And it's about his life and his adventures. And it's a lot very mundane kind of stuff for the most part, but it's told in this sort of epic verse. And I think that's part of the comedy of it, is like, this is not really a person worth celebrating, and yet he's had this long poetic work dedicated to him as if he's like one of the great Greek heroes or something. But it's quite a funny book. The rhymes are very amusing. The style of verse that Burgess uses is I think it's like a Lord Byron format. It's like 3 pairs of rhyming couplets and then a 4th separate rhyming couplet that has a different rhyme to it. And it's done mostly throughout, although he does diverge into Spenserian verse for one of the books later on, and then come back again. But it's quite humorous and it's quite playful, and it's great for like a lover of language, as I am. I love the English language. I love all languages, but I particularly love the English language. And his rhymes are so well chosen, and he has to kind of be really creative with them sometimes. Occasionally he'll make up his own words for the rhymes, and occasionally he'll use foreign words for the rhymes. And it's just a very playful use of language by someone who clearly has great love for the art form and is playing. This is a work that was clearly created as a form of play, and I think that's really interesting. The story, there's not that much to the story. I'll kind of recount it in brief. It starts with the kind of heritage of the hero, Michael Byrne, tells about where he came from in Ireland, and then kind of details the course of his life as he becomes a minor musician, composer. He goes to work in Germany and ends up serving under the Nazi Third Reich and has to get out of Dodge. Throughout it all, he's being kind of a scoundrel and impregnating various women all over the globe as he travels. He then disappears to kind of hide because his skin is a little bit in trouble after dealing with the Nazis. And we learn about some of his children in the second half of the book. He has 2 twin sons who he's obviously not around for. He's an absentee father, and we see them as adults. And they eventually, one of them is a priest, and they eventually have a reunion with their like then 90 to 100-year-old father, which is fairly disappointing and uninspiring. That's pretty much the whole story. He goes on long digressions and tangents about various things. There's one in particular I thought was funny where the 2 sons go to see, Tim and Tom, their names are, they go to see a play based on H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. And there's like 10, 20 pages devoted to this play of The Time Machine, which I thought was kind of unusual. Like it's hard to find kind of unifying threads throughout this book. It sort of wanders around different places. But I really, really loved it. I loved it just because of the playfulness of it, the humor of it. The use of language is really nice, and it just brought me joy. I'm not a huge poetry appreciator, let's say. I like some poetry quite a lot. I enjoy it when I read it, but it's not something that I've really studied in depth. It's not something I know a ton about. It's not something where I'm very widely read. So this is one of my, I would say, favorite poetic works that I've encountered. It's just full of joy and life, and it's got the usual kind of bawdy humor that Burgess likes to play with. It's certainly not a book for children in that sense. It's quite ribald in many ways. It's very Rabelaisian. It's also very Joycean, like all of his books are. He's a huge James Joyce fan, and I am not a James Joyce fan. I have not really enjoyed anything by James Joyce that I've read, apart from Dubliners. But I can appreciate some of what he did, and I like Burgess far more than I like Joyce. So I appreciate some of the borrowings that he brings in from James Joyce. But really just a nice, playful little book, very quite short, 150 pages. I read the whole thing out loud because I wanted to get a sense of the sound of it, because I think that's important to do in poetry. So I read the whole thing to myself out loud, and quite enjoyed it. And I thought I would give you a little brief taste of what the rhyme scheme is like, and sort of you can get a sense for the tone and the humor of it. So I was going to read 3 stanzas that stuck out to me as kind of funny and nice. This is from when Byrne is first like reaching adulthood and starting to develop as a musician, and it talks about his choice of instrument. The trombone's a descendant of the sackbut. In music, solemn, martial, crisply clear, is produced by sliding forward and then back, but you have to lip out the harmonic series. In something like an oscular attack, but in a young boy like Byrne, the action wearies. An adjunct of the adult life is missing. One needs the muscular panache of kissing. The Industrial Revolution, Britain's pride, began, as we all know, in Lancashire. It had a strong demotic cultural side. Lest counter-revolution start to rear its snarling head, a salve was pre-applied, whose safe cathartic properties we hear in choirs that belt out oratorios and factory bands. Byrne played in one of those. He played outside it, too. At 17, he put a Catholic boodle girl in pod, and to avoid the inevitable scene of outraged parents crying out to God, he swiftly packed a toothbrush and some clean shirts, and of course the horn with sliding rod, both symbols of his sexual bravado, and fled like Nanki Poo in The Mikado. I happen to love The Mikado, so that made me happy to see that reference there. I should also say it's an incredibly literate work. It's got filled with many, many references to other works of classic literature, poetry, lots of, like I said, multilingual references, lots of words from French and Spanish and Italian and things like that. I always really like that stuff. I know some people might find it pretentious or might find it difficult. I don't know, maybe it's a sort of smugness on my part, but I take pride in getting those references, and I find myself really enjoying something when I see, oh, that's a reference to The Mikado. I know The Mikado, and that kind of recognition brings me pleasure. So I like that kind of stuff. And if you are someone who's well-read or versed in music or theater or things like that, and the classics, you might find a lot to enjoy here. So certainly not a book for everyone. If you're not a fan of verse, you probably won't like it because the entire thing is in verse, but it's such a rare thing that's done today. Like, you don't see very many poets nowadays. It's such an old-fashioned form and quite a daring thing for someone like Burgess to do, I think. And it's certainly a challenge too. Very difficult to write this sort of thing. So to put out, I mean, he didn't actually publish it. Maybe he never intended to publish it, but it was published after his death. This came out in 1993, I believe. But, for someone like him to write a novel in verse in the 90s is, I think, quite a audacious thing to do. And I think that's really cool. So we need to keep these art forms alive because, verse and poetry is not just for people of the past, it's for all ages. And I like that people are still trying to keep it alive. So I didn't know anything about this. I bought it completely blind, just knowing I want to read everything by Burgess. And I didn't know that it was poetic when I bought it. I just picked it up and thought, oh, this will go on my stack. And I started reading it, and I just fell in love with it. It's probably something I will read again because it's got so much complexity in the language. It's not, the plot is not always that easy to follow because of the way it's structured in this meter and this rhyme. But I really thought that the sound of it, just from a musical and a sonorous point of view, was really fun and beautiful. And it's something I could see myself dipping back into and reading again and again, because it was just a great time reading it. What else was I going to say about Byrne? I think that's about it. That's really all I have to say about it. It was a great time. It's the 4th thing by Anthony Burgess that I have read, and I have loved all of them. It did remind me a little bit, some people have commented like this in reviews, it reminded me of Earthly Powers, which is one of his best loved novels and one of the ones that was nominated for a Booker Prize, I believe. Earthly Powers was sort of this panoramic story about the 20th century, and it followed a priest. There's a priest in this. There's some echoes of that. It's there's some echoes of kind of the broad themes of what happened in the 20th century. You have fascism, and you have art, and you have music, and you have religion, all kind of interplaying together. I'd have a hard time really saying what this book is about, if it's about anything, but there are certainly those kind of themes you can pick up. And then, the themes of relationships and family and children and things like that are present as well. So there's a lot going on, but it's not like a clearly allegorical or moral tale that like has a clear point to it. It's just a story. And I think the story is of less importance than the meter and the rhythmic scheme as well. So kind of a light one, but a lot of fun. Recommended if you are into poetry and if you like Anthony Burgess as much as I do. That's all I have to say about it. If you enjoyed this review, please like the video, click the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, leave me comments down below on your thoughts on Anthony Burgess or epic works of poetry that you may have read. And I will be back next week with another book review for your viewing pleasure. I try to leave a video every single Wednesday, so please check back. And for those of you who do check back every week and always leave me comments, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you, and I will catch you next time.